Hi, my name is Mariam, and my presentation will explore the topic of standard healthcare delivery amongst incarcerated individuals. Canada's public healthcare system provides all citizens with medically necessary healthcare, regardless of financial or other barriers. Since this also includes those who are imprisoned, the Corrections and Conditional Release Act outlines how the Correctional Services of Canada is responsible for providing inmates with essential healthcare, including mental health services, with the goal of reintegrating them into society upon successful rehabilitation. The statistics associated with health outcomes of the incarcerated population does not support this, however, as there is a higher rate of mental illnesses observed amongst this group compared to the general population. Even when comparing inmates with other inmates, it is clear that there is a difference amongst various facilities with regards to the standards of healthcare delivery. Evidence shows that there is a decreased rate of identifying and treating mental illnesses amongst prisoners, which has led to increased risk of inmate mortality by means of suicide and violence. This leads me to my research question. For both male and female inmates of all ages in correctional facilities within the Greater Toronto Area, does the delivery of regular health care, similar to the level of care provided to the general population, reduce consequences associated with mental illness in incarcerated individuals compared to incarcerated individuals who do not receive adequate care? Throughout this presentation, you can expect to gain a better understanding about the topic through the discussion of these themes listed. By spreading awareness about the issue, more research can be conducted in the hopes that an effective solution may be implemented. What prompted me to study this topic further was because of the persisting problem, that is, the non-efficient delivery of standard healthcare amongst incarcerated individuals. The prevalence of psychiatric disorders amongst prisoners has increased due to the lack of detection and poor treatment. There are several factors that contribute to this, one of which is the shortage in resources. Overcrowding, as well as the overwhelming increase in prisoners who have mental illnesses, far exceed the resources available. Additionally, there aren't enough qualified healthcare professionals that can provide inmates with the appropriate care they need. Another factor that limits the accessibility of care is the stigma surrounding mental health. Inmates do not want to risk admitting they have a mental illness for fear of how they might be perceived by other inmates. It is important to note that although coming up with a plausible solution to the problem should be for the benefit of those who are incarcerated, it also serves to benefit the general population. During the incarceration period, if an individual does not receive standard health care, they are more likely to experience adverse health consequences upon release, including death. The person is more likely to cause harm to the general population, either by spreading communicable diseases or by falling back into a criminalistic lifestyle. It is therefore imperative to make use of the incarceration period by addressing these issues, which can aid in reducing the risk of adverse health consequences amongst the incarcerated population. Most individuals who suffer from a mental illness do not get involved with the criminal justice system and therefore are not incarcerated. Despite this, however, there is an overrepresentation of individuals with mental disorders in prison. One of the most common mental illnesses seen in prisoners is mood disorders, specifically depression, which can be attributed to stressors. Depression occurring in individuals who are not incarcerated mainly results from experiencing poor social determinants of health, such as poor education, low income, or homelessness. Imprisonment can also lead to the development of depression due to the trauma and high-stress environment that comes with being incarcerated. Regardless of whether or not prisoners had pre-existing mental disorders prior to incarceration, the prevalence of mental disorders are still higher amongst those who are in custody. Research is also consistent with the fact that there is a decline in mental health as the incarceration period increases. There have been several studies conducted on this topic, 4 of which discuss issues that are relevant to my specific study. The first study was performed in order to assess the commonness of symptoms of mental health issues observed amongst incarcerated individuals in Ontario. This source does a good job of identifying where the gaps are with regards to the delivery of mental health services. By exposing the problem, it makes it more possible for a solution to be implemented. Although the study was able to successfully measure severe symptoms that were present amongst these inmates, they were not able to offer all the inmates within the population of interest a chance to participate, since some were too mentally unstable to assess safely. The second study recognized that screening is essential to addressing mental health issues within correctional facilities, since it provides information on individuals' mental health status. The study aimed to assess whether screening could reduce inconsistencies with regards to accessing care. What I found to be especially important was the fact that they chose to study newly admitted inmates, which can give true insight on mental health patterns associated with the incarceration period. Although this strategy proved to aid in their treatment, researchers were unable to confirm whether the treatment given to the appropriate inmates met their medical needs. The third study examined the use of mental health services amongst individuals prior to and during incarceration. This study is a great source, since it was conducted in such a way that made it possible to compare the standard of mental health service delivery both inside and outside correctional facilities. The findings suggested that the reason behind the higher rates of mental illnesses seen in incarcerated individuals can be attributed to the fact that prisoners do not seek or have difficulty accessing medical care. Additionally, it was found that individuals who accessed mental health services prior to being incarcerated worsened after becoming incarcerated. Despite this, researchers did not have access to sufficient data from the correctional facilities, and as a result, they had to make assumptions, which could have affected the accuracy of their results. The last study defined causes of death and mortality rates amongst incarcerated individuals, both during and after incarceration, and compared the data to the data of the general population. It also discussed how newly released incarcerated individuals are at an increased risk of mortality. By identifying this risk during incarceration, these issues may be addressed through the provision of programs and health services. This could decrease adverse health outcomes after incarceration, which would benefit both ex-prisoners as well as the general population. The researchers, however, did not include deaths of cohort members that occurred outside Ontario, which could have produced a higher death rate amongst incarcerated individuals. More research is needed in order to assess whether the medical services being provided to inmates are effective in treating their illnesses. This can improve the standard of healthcare delivery as well as decrease adverse health outcomes amongst the incarcerated population. The objective of this study is to determine whether the delivery of regular healthcare reduces consequences associated with mental illness in incarcerated individuals in the Greater Toronto Area. This can be accomplished by assessing the mental health status of prisoners in the GTA and analyzing the statistical association between standard healthcare delivery and consequences of mental illness in this population. The design of the study will be cross-sectional, since surveys will be used to measure the delivery of regular healthcare to prisoners within a short time period. The subjects of the study will consist of male and female inmates in correctional facilities that are within the Greater Toronto Area. The inclusion criteria will be as follows: male and female inmates in correctional facilities within the Greater Toronto Area who speak English and do not receive regular healthcare services as defined by the Correctional Services Act. The exclusion criteria will be as follows: inmates who do not speak English, who are not mentally sound enough to withstand being questioned in an ethical manner, and who regularly receive healthcare services in accordance to the Correctional Services Act. After receiving approval from the Correctional Services Research Committee, subjects will be recruited by communicating with the correctional services staff as well as the prisoners. This will allow for the research to be explained and for proper consent to be obtained. Prisoners who meet the inclusion criteria and give their consent to participate will be selected by the researcher for face-to-face interviews. The results obtained from the participant group will be compared to those who do receive standard healthcare. The predictor variable will be providing regular healthcare to incarcerated individuals. As for the outcome variable, improving health outcomes amongst incarcerated individuals would decrease healthcare costs and reduce crime rates, which would increase public safety. This study will use an analytical approach to meet the research objective. The standard t-test will be used to compare incarcerated individuals who receive regular health care to those who do not receive regular care. This will help determine whether there is a significant difference between the two groups. There are many inmates who suffer from mental illnesses in prison and could benefit from mental health research. However, if inmates are not mentally sound enough to withstand ethical questioning, they should not participate. Those who are able to participate in mental health research can be perceived as weak, which can lead to severe consequences in prison. Therefore, the researcher should conduct the research as discreetly as possible and prioritize confidentiality. Additionally, the incarcerated population is vulnerable and needs to be treated justly during the research process. Since this study is cross-sectional, it will be difficult to determine causal inference with regards to the prisoner's mental health status. More research is needed to understand the degree to which being incarcerated increases the incidence of mental illness. In doing this, we may be able to reduce the prevalence of mental illness in both prisons and the community, as well as decrease poor health outcomes amongst the incarcerated population. There are also potential challenges associated with obtaining permission to conduct this study. A proposal would have to be submitted to the Correctional Services Research Committee for evaluation to determine whether the study will be valuable to correctional services and the ministry. Due to the nature of the environment in which the study takes place, the most reliable method for surveying the subjects would have to be face-to-face. Although this can introduce interviewer bias, as well as be time-consuming and costly, this will be the best method for the researcher to obtain responses from this type of sample population. Thank you for listening to my presentation.